Hello and welcome to a special trade deadline edition of the Post-Gazette Penguins podcast. I'm your host, King Jemison, coming to you late on Friday night of the NHL trade deadline. And the Penguins were very, very quiet, uncharacteristically for Kyle Dubas. We'll talk about the one deal that they made and what it means, what the entire deadline approach means for the team moving forward. But first, I want to remind you that this show is presented by FanDuel, where you can bet on all the NHL action. As I record, most of the games tonight are ongoing, and they haven't put up the odds for tomorrow. So let's take a look at the very intriguing race for the Norris Trophy, where Cale Makar is a plus 105 favorite at FanDuel, but Zach Werenski and Evan Bouchard aren't too far behind at plus 240 each. Quinn Hughes, surprisingly far back at plus 1,700 at FanDuel. So pivoting to the NHL trade deadline, it was at 3 p.m. today. That would be on Friday. Kind of waiting around all day to see what the Penguins might do. And they only made one deal, acquiring Elmer Soderblom from Detroit. The 24-year-old is a 6'8", 252-pound winger. They acquired him for a 2026 third-round pick. That pick originally belonged to the San Jose Sharks. So listen, this fits perfectly into the type of deal that Kyle Dubas has been making recently. Soderblom is in his mid-20s. He's definitely got some talent and potential. You can see the size right away, 6'8", 252, but he has some skill for that size. Kyle Dubas talked today about his ability on the forecheck. That was something that they feel like they have in their fourth line, but maybe not something they're seeing a whole lot of up and down the roster and throughout the system. So Soderblom can certainly bring that. He's not an enforcer at that size, but he will throw his body around. He is one of the Red Wings leaders in hits per 60 minutes of ice time. Not a whole lot of production at the NHL level, 22 points in 86 games, including 3 in 39 this year. But last year, the Red Wings offensive stats with Soderblom on the ice were some of the best on the team. This year, the defensive stats look pretty good. Hasn't necessarily put both of them together in the same campaign, but there's definitely some promising signs with each, and he's put up some pretty good numbers in significant time in the AHL. So what's his role going to look like in Pittsburgh? I would say he's going to get opportunities in the bottom six, most likely. He's probably going to spend a lot of time in the press box as well. I don't imagine he's going to be an everyday part of the lineup, but we'll see. I think he's going to have an opportunity with some of the absences and injuries that the Penguins are dealing with. And certainly at age 24, with another year on his deal that if through next season, and then he'll be a restricted free agent in the summer of 2027, it's a pretty low-risk move for a player that Dubas said they've been looking into for a while. And it's the type of deal that might help you now. It might help you in the future, and it's certainly not costing too much. So that would be a pretty underwhelming deadline if the Penguins were clearly a cup contender and you'd like to see them add. It'd be a pretty underwhelming deadline if they were clearly a seller and trying to add assets. But they fit somewhere in between those two, and I actually think this was a really good deadline for what the Penguins are trying to accomplish. Because Kyle Dubas left the chemistry of this remarkable team alone. And I spoke this week to Chris Letang and Brian Rust at morning skate on Thursday before the teams lost to Buffalo about sort of how they would take it if the Penguins were to be quiet at the deadline, if Kyle Dubas were to do not too much. You know, sometimes that can be viewed as sort of a vote of no confidence from the GM. And they both said in different ways that's not necessarily how they would take it. That Brian Rust said you could also take that as an endorsement of the team's chemistry. He went on to praise the team's chemistry. Chris Letang said, you know, if something is working, why change it? That's something that he's afraid of. He talked about how, you know, sometimes they made the big blockbuster move in his 20-year tenure in Pittsburgh and it hasn't worked out. And sometimes they make, you know, a few tweaks here and there, and that's a better approach. And he talked about how they have a good thing working so they can be patient. That seemed to be Kyle Dubas's approach. I think the market helped dictate that as well, that it turned into a very much a seller's market. Teams were getting very big returns for players that are far from stars. And so in that market, it wasn't going to make sense for a team that's looking to make the playoffs, but probably not really contend for the Stanley Cup to push the chips in and spend big and use some of the assets they've stockpiled in this rebuild that Dubas is undergoing. And at the same time, I think it says a lot that Dubas didn't sell given what he could have gotten in return. Stuart Skinner, Anthony Mantha, and the rest of the Penguins UFAs are still with the team. They're going to be able to help the Penguins down the stretch run. Stuart Skinner would have certainly fetched some very nice return given how many teams could use help with goaltending. Anthony Mantha, given that he's been one of the Penguins' top scorers this season on a very, very low cap hit, he could have certainly fetched a nice return as well. And yet they're both going to be around in Pittsburgh to help Dan Muse's team try to break this playoff drought and stay above water in a race that's getting increasingly tight. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But, I think Soderblom is, I think, just the latest in a series of trades that have accomplished something Dubas has said he wanted to do, which is acquire players in their mid-20s who they believe can benefit from the Penguins coaching and development staff. And as Dubas pointed out, this deadline has really been ongoing for a while. Like, yes, the Penguins only made one trade in the week of the deadline, but they did make a series of in-season trades that have really shaped this roster. I mean, in December, they trade Tristan Jarry for Stuart Skinner and Brett Kulak and a second-round pick. And now they've turned Brett Kulak into Sam Girard and another second-round pick. They also, of course, traded for Igor Chinakhov, their leading goal scorer since January 1st, acquiring him for a second and a third-round pick and Danton Heinen. They added Ilya Solovyov as well, who I think sort of similar to Soderblom is more of a shot in the dark, sort of a depth piece that you feel comfortable putting in the lineup and you want to give a chance, but also it's not the biggest deal if they end up spending most of their time in the press box. But all of these guys were in their mid-20s and for various reasons had shown some potential, and Dubas wanted to see what Muse and his staff could do with them. And I think that that's the type of move that you're making when you believe in the team that you have right now, but you're also still positioning yourself for the future, realizing that your days of cup contention are in front of you, not so much in this season. Now, I think that this deadline will be a success, even if the Penguins don't make the playoffs, because let me put it this way. This deadline does not become a failure if the Penguins don't reach the playoffs this year. It becomes a failure if Kyle Dubas is never able to take this treasure trove of assets that he's collected and turn this team into a cup contender eventually. But this year, the playoffs are looking increasingly difficult, and there's a few reasons for that. Number one, Sidney Crosby is still injured. Now, the good news on that is that today he skated with the team at the optional practice Friday. Dan Muse said he was still non-contact along with Jack St. Ivany, who was also out there. But Crosby's moving really well. He looks really good. I can't imagine that he's going to be out for too much longer. Unfortunately, just as he appears to be nearing a return, Evgeni Malkin showed himself the door and will be out of the lineup for 5 games because he's been suspended for slashing Rasmus Dahlin in Thursday's game against Buffalo. It was an egregious mental error by Evgeni Malkin. Dahlin cross-checked him in the back, was penalized for that, certainly was a penalty-worthy play and something that Malkin was understandably upset about. But it's not understandable to turn around and hit him in the head with your stick, which is exactly what Malkin did. And given his past history, he's been suspended twice before for stick infractions. The league gave him 5 games. So that means that the Penguins are going to play at least a game or two and perhaps more without both Sidney Crosby and Evgeni Malkin. And if Crosby's timeline does not change, which even though it looks like he's going to be out there soon, there's been no official update that his timeline has changed, then they could be without them for 5 really tough games, including 4 against teams in playoff positions. With those absences in mind, the Penguins recalled Ville Koivunen. He's going to have a chance probably to enter the lineup on Saturday against the Flyers. And this is also going to continue to present opportunities for Avery Hayes and for a lot of these Penguins forwards who have kind of been inserted higher in the lineup with Crosby's absence and now Malkin joining them. So sort of trying times, and that's why there was some thought that maybe Dubas would get more aggressive at the trade deadline, given that this team has put itself in playoff position, but it could slip away with the absence they have right now. He did the right thing by not being reactionary. He said that, like the rest of us, or like anybody who cares about the team, anybody fans watching, anybody following the team, that he was emotional in the immediate aftermath of Malkin's slashing incident on Thursday, realizing what it can mean for the team. But he, upon further reflection, realized that this was not something that deserves a complete change in their deadline plans, and he is correct in that. So the NHL trade deadline is come and gone. The 2026 Penguins playoff push is underway. They have 21 games remaining, starting Saturday against the Flyers, and then they have a Sunday home matchup against the Bruins, who they lost to on Tuesday of this week, before they head out for a 5-game road trip. I would say this has the potential to be a stretch that spirals out of control, but if the Penguins are able to keep it on track, then they're set to have one of the best deadline acquisitions in the league, with Sidney Crosby's return certainly on the horizon. So that's going to do it for the trade deadline edition of the Post-Gazette Penguins podcast. Again, only move was trading for Elmer Soderblom from the Detroit Red Wings. We'll see what type of role he has in Pittsburgh. But we'll be back next week as the Penguins hit the road for that pretty long trip. And we'll recap the games from the weekend against the Flyers and Bruins. 2 games that I think are more winnable than the games that the Penguins have on this road trip. Getting 4 points out of the weekend would be a huge boost, but certainly going to be difficult, likely without Malkin and Crosby. So please like and subscribe wherever you're watching this. Please subscribe at post-gazette.com to get the best of our work. I'm King Jemison. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great day.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.